Good evening and welcome. Tonight we'll be going over the history and geography of Spain. Spain is located in Western Europe on an area known as the Iberian Peninsula. You can see that it takes up pretty much almost the entire peninsula. Also on the peninsula is Portugal. You can see this long border here with Portugal. And there's also little Andorra that lies on the peninsula technically. And then this border here is all with France. Oh, book's in the way. We'll go through this book after we finish going over the history of Spain. So, Spain also has some other interesting borders. Down here we have Gibraltar. It's an overseas UK territory. And if I push this up a bit, you can see Ceuta down here in Morocco. You can see the little border right there. There's also the city of Melilla further south here. It's not on my map. But Spain owns those two cities that are on the African continent. There are also lots of islands that belong to Spain. You can see some of them over here. Can you see them over here? There we go. These are the Balearic Islands or the Balearic Islands. I'm not sure how they're correctly pronounced in English because I've heard both, but it's the Islas Baleares. This big island right here is Majorca. And over here we have Ibiza. There's Formentera and Minorca right there, among many other tiny ones. There are lots of little tiny Mediterranean islands that belong to Spain. And there's the Canary Islands, which I don't have a map of for you tonight. They are just down there off the coast of North Africa. They are very mountainous, very volcanic. Spain in general is a very mountainous country. It seems that the landscape is either mountain or plain. There's no in between. So let's take a look at some of the landscape here in mainland Spain. Let's see, let's start up here in the Pyrenees Mountains that form this natural border with France. They're very high, very impassable mountains. And there are various mountain ranges all throughout Spain. Up here you can see the Cordillera Cantabria up here. We have the Sistema Ibérico and the Sistema Central kind of cutting through this area we're going to talk about in a minute. In the south, you can see the Sierra Morena, the Sierra Nevada, the Sistemas Ibéricos, among various other mountains. There's too many to mention. We won't get into them in total detail. But around all these mountains, we have various plateaus and valleys. So let's get into those. We have a lot of river valleys, but the two that I want to point out are the Ebro, which flows down here into the Mediterranean, creating a valley all around it, and the Guadalquivir, which comes down through here out into the ocean, creating a big valley around it. And there are also beautiful coastlines that you can see, like the mountains here create this kind of secluded coastline all down here on the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. So it's very flat and warm, gets all those ocean breezes that the mountains capture there. You can see cities like Barcelona, there's Valencia, Alicante, among many others. You can see just how many towns and cities are along the Mediterranean coast. It's a very populated area. The Atlantic coastline up here in the north is pretty much the opposite. It's very rocky and craggy and cliffy and cold. So not a lot of like beach towns up in the north, nothing like it is to the south. Other major cities, you can see Seville and Cadiz down here by the river. Zaragoza was on the Ebro River. And the capital city of Madrid is located in a region you can kind of see on the map here. You can see this big section of yellow. This is known as the Meseta, and it is a big plateau region. This is where all the farmland is. There's lots and lots of regions of just flat mountains interrupting it, more flat mountains interrupting. And you can see some of the lakes here caused by glaciers back in the Ice Age. But Madrid sits right in the middle of it, the capital city. And let's see, what else did I want to mention? I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, the historical regions, because I mentioned all the historical regions when I went through the different geographies of European countries, and Spain has quite a lot of them. So we have Valencia over here, Catalonia, up here there's Galicia, Asturias, Castile Leon, La Mancha, down here, Gino from Don Quixote, among many, many, many others. Historical regions are important to its history. Navarra, up here. I said the Basque country. Did I mention the Basques? The Basque country, which we'll talk a little bit about in its history. It's kind of an important spot. And, why don't we just get into history? If I remember something, I'll throw it in there. So, starting up in the northern region up here, I think it's somewhere around up here, are some really interesting caves known as the Altamira Caves, where there's absolutely gorgeous cave art that was made by Cro-Magnon people sometime between 35 to 13,000 BCE, sometimes in the year between 35 to 13,000 BCE. Absolutely gorgeous. So there have been people here since there were people. The earliest people groups that we know of would have been the Iberians, hence the name Iberian Peninsula. There are also many Celts up in the northern regions here. Eventually the Phoenicians would sail along the Mediterranean. They were big sailors and traders, and they would set up their own little port cities and towns along the coastline here in modern-day Spain. One of their colonies that became more prosperous than Phoenicia was Carthage. So eventually this area fell under Carthaginian control, and after they went to war with the Romans during the Punic Wars, this area came under Roman control. And the Romans were the ones who referred to this land as Hispania. I should note, since we just flew through all of ancient history there, that this is a brief history of Spain. I'm not going to get into too many details about things, so please don't be upset if I gloss over something or skip an event in particular. We're just cruising through history here. In 409, the Vandals would have invaded and started taking over lands away from the Romans, which their Western Empire was quite weak at the time, so it was the perfect time to do so. Later, the Visigoths would come in, among many, many other groups that would establish many different settlements all throughout Spain. Hence why there's so many different regions, different historical regions. But that came to a screeching halt in the year 711 when the Umayyad Caliphate began to invade up through the south and start to conquer land. So these people who came in to take over after the Romans were Christians, specifically Catholics at the time, because that was the branch of Christianity that existed in this part of the world. And the Umayyads were Islamic. They were Muslims. So they brought Islam with them as they conquered. Eventually, various Moorish communities, which was the Islamic people group that came into the region, were established mainly in areas like Valencia and Granada, in famous sites being in Cordoba, the Alhambra being like the most famous. There's Andalusia, another historical region that was established by the Muslims at this time. Eventually, though, the other territories in the north that hadn't been conquered by the Muslims remained staunchly Catholic and slowly rose to power, in particular Aragon, Leon, Castile would slowly rise in power, and they would begin an event known as the Reconquista, or the reconquering of lands. And they slowly made their way through and started taking the lands back for the Catholics. And that culminated in 1492 in Granada, when they had captured the city and all of Spain was Catholic once again. In 1469, though, just before that, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon married. A very powerful union. Castile, from what I understand, Castile was they were the richest province, kingdom area of Spain. Aragon was the largest and most influential, so the marriage of that was a big deal. They created pretty much their own mini empire here on the peninsula. Incredibly powerful and very Catholic. They were staunchly Catholic. They actually kicked off what's known as the Spanish Inquisition, where they had priests go around to anyone they suspected were not Catholic or not Catholic enough, torture them until they confessed, and would kick them out of the country if they refused to convert, mainly targeting Muslims and Jews and anyone who had converted to Catholicism from a different religion. Very staunchly Catholic. They were also very famous for commissioning Christopher Columbus in 1492 to sail west to find a trading route. And very famously, he discovered the Americas and started claiming lands for Spain, and thus began the real Spanish Empire. Spain established many extremely profitable colonies at the expense of the natives there in North, Central, and Southern America. And they essentially became the wealthiest country in the world with all of the gold and resources and labor they procured from these places. They established a huge maritime power as well, most famously in the Battle of Lepanto in the Mediterranean against the Ottomans. That was a big success. But their Spanish Armada was defeated by the British in the 1600s. I didn't write it down, but you know what I mean. Eventually, the royal family of Spain married into the royal family of the Habsburgs over in the Holy Roman Empire, thus expanding that empire even further. And it became an insanely powerful family, with total control over Spain and most of Europe at this point in history. However, that came to a screeching halt in 1701 during the War of Spanish Succession. The reigning Habsburg monarch passed away. His heir was a little infant baby. So the Bourbons up in France, that royal family, claimed that they had the rightful claim to the Spanish throne because of some marriage or other, some little complication. And there was a war between the two sides that lasted until 1714. The Bourbons would eventually win out and they would control Spain. Until that came to a screeching halt in the 1800s when when Napoleon rose to power. So the French Revolution happened. Napoleon gains power. He invades and takes over Spain. This led to quite a few things. It led to another civil war against both sides. It also led to the colonies over in the Americas declaring independence because they didn't really have any rulers at the time. So some fought for independence, some just declared it and said that's that, stomping their foot down, saying we're independent now because Spain's a mess. And that led to a huge financial loss for Spain after Napoleon finished being Napoleon. That culminated in 1895. Cuba was trying to desperately get its independence, which Spain was staunchly fighting against. The Americans intervened because they were very shocked by what was happening, not to mention one of their ships exploded in Cuba and they blamed the Spanish. So the Spanish-American War resulted in a huge loss for Spain, and Spain had to give up the rest of their colonies in the Pacific, like the Philippines and Cuba and Puerto Rico and other parts of the Caribbean. It was essentially the nail in the coffin for the Spanish Empire, a shadow of what it once was. During World War I, Spain remained neutral because they had their own political crisis happening during all of this, a big reshuffling, figuring out what to do. In 1923, the king at the time appointed a dictator to rule the country, to just be like, hey, be in charge, figure things out, get stuff done. And being a dictator, he did until the Depression hit, and the king removed him from power in 1931. No, in 1931? No, the election was in 1931. I think he forced him out just before that. So 1931, there's a big election. Everything changes. New constitution, democracy. They remove the king from power. And as they are trying to figure out their new government, there is a coup led by Francisco Franco in 1936 that leads to the Spanish Civil War, which was absolutely devastating for the country. Massive loss of life, lots of fighting. Eventually Franco would win out and become the ruler of Spain just as World War II was beginning. So they were also neutral because there was just too much political turmoil happening here in the country to fight a war over the rest of the continent. But they definitely sympathized with the Axis powers since Franco was a big old fascist. So once the war ended, Spain realized they didn't have any allies whatsoever, and they were quite politically isolated. Franco remained in power until his death in 1975. There was another frantic reshuffling, but they decided to have a king again, and King Juan Carlos I, I believe, became king. And slowly but surely Spain restored its democracy, which it still is today. There were quite a few bumps in the road. The Basque country up here, like I mentioned, wanted its independence, and the Basque people are very, very different from the Spanish people. They speak their own language, which I think isn't even related to Spanish, if I'm correct. They have their own culture, their own everything that's very separate from Spain. There were some really intense independence fighters that would do atrocious things throughout Spain, if you know what I mean. But peace was declared in 2018, and that's in the past now. There was another very sad attack in Madrid in 2004 committed by Al-Qaeda at the train station, which, again, we're not going to mention because it was horrific and very, very terrible. Apparently, they wanted to restore Muslim control in Spain, which hadn't been there since 1492, but okay. Very tragic event, I should say. Spain is part of the European Union. They're part of the Eurozone. They use the euro as their currency, which has really helped them out economically. Since the 1960s, their economy has been growing, and tourism growing, especially coming from the UK, I know, and Germany, especially the islands here and along the coast, the Mediterranean. So Spain is doing quite well for itself today. Just a note that the Catalonia over here, this region, tried for a minute in 2017 to declare its independence. Nobody recognized them, and they eventually had to give up because too much political turmoil, as you can imagine. And essentially that is where we are, Spain today. So why don't we flip through the book and look through pictures so I can explain a little bit more without being too rushed, I suppose. There's a matador and a very angry bull. Let's see what we've got. Spain. Beautiful architecture there by Gaudi. We'll see, I think on the back of the book you can see La Sagrada Familia. This big cathedral that Antoni Gaudi had been building. He's now passed away, but it's still under construction. It's believed to be done by 2030. Playing some football. Oh my gosh, tapas. So in some parts of Spain, you eat tapas meals where you just have very tiny plates of things that you set out and everyone takes a little bit. Yum, yum, yum. Political map of Spain. Oh, here's the Canary Islands you can see down here. They're just down there. big rocky coastline here. It's known as the Coast of Death, it says. My goodness. I mean, you can tell why. Good thing they've got a lighthouse there to help out. Ceuta and Melilla. That's Melilla right here, I believe. Over in Morocco. And another map of Spain. The gorgeous Mediterranean beach, isn't that lovely? And the fields of the Meseta. Gorgeous countryside. The Pyrenees up here, big mountains. And a huge waterfall, Cascada del Cinca, Spain's tallest waterfall. Here's some of that cave art I mentioned at Altamira. It's really incredible. And here's one of the lakes here, Sanabria Lake. And this looks like the Canaries. Big old rocky, I told you. There's Barcelona again. And let's see, this is Seville. A little fox. And let's see up here, flamingos in the wetlands here, the Doñana wetlands. Ooh, a lynx. Big, beautiful wildcat. The national flower, the carnation. And wild lavender. Oh, imagine how good that smells. Their national bird, the imperial eagle. And some chamois up on the rocks there. And we've got a big old vulture here. Right? I believe so. Cork trees, which is where corks in your wine bottles come from. Little spoonbills here looking for some food. Gorgeous sea life in the Balearic Islands. And some dolphins near the Canary Islands. Ooh, look at these ancient peoples here. These are Neanderthals. Making some tools there. And how the Altamira caves would have been made. And you can see, is that the same cave? I'm not sure, but it's remarkable, isn't it? All those old little etchings. Wonder what they mean. Segovia's aqueduct, built by the Romans to carry water. And an old Visigoth church, San Pedro de la Nave. Oh, how neat. This is in Andalusia, where the Muslims called it Al-Andalus. The Moors here, it says. And this is, I've always said his name is Maimonides, but I assume if he was a Spanish Moor that that's not how his name was pronounced. So let me know in the comments, but he was a big philosopher during that time, during the Muslim rule. The Reconquest. You can see just how far it came down until they hit Granada. Let's see, that's Columbus there, Ferdinand and Isabella, and some people being tortured in the Inquisition. Ooh, there's Columbus as he's about to head out from the Canary Islands. And a map of the Spanish Empire so you can see just how far they stretched out. And over here as well, eventually up there too, thanks to the Habsburgs. And Spain and Portugal had an agreement called the Treaty of Tordesillas, where they drew a line down through a part of the world that they didn't even know what was there and said Portugal gets everything on this side, Spain gets everything on this side. So Portugal got Brazil, Spain got literally everything else. They really went out, and you can see the Philippines there too. The Spanish Armada, looks like they're fighting there. And let's see, which royal family is this? Philip V. I think he was Bourbon, I want to say. I believe. Let's see, during the Spanish War of Independence in the Pyrenees, Spanish, British, and French fighting. a worker strike in Barcelona. This is that dictator. I didn't mention his name, but Primo de Rivera was his name. And this is after the 1931 elections. People celebrating of some kind. Let's see. The Catholic conservative leader here. And the Spanish Civil War. Very, very terrible time. I can't emphasize that enough. The famous painter Pablo Picasso painted a beautiful artwork called Guernica, which depicts the horrors of the Spanish Civil War. This is just a corner of it. The full painting is in the UN, so that when all of the diplomats pass by it, they are reminded of what happens when diplomacy fails. And there's Francisco Franco. The 92 Olympics, I believe it was, 1992. The big opening ceremony. Looks like Columbus heading out in the water. And this is a pro-Basque independence movement. Let's see, some migrants here from Ecuador, it says, working in the farms. And let's see, Mariano Rajoy, who's no longer a political figure. King Juan Carlos I here. There we go. My goodness, let me slide this down so I can move the book a little easier. There we go. Inspecting the troops. Casting a vote there. And there's the Congress of Deputies. Looks very fancy. A map of Madrid. You can see the beautiful scenery here. And a big map. Let's see what we can find. The Royal Palace, the Royal Theatre, Isabel Plaza. Big park area here with museums all over the place. There's the Congress of Deputies. Awesome. Let's see. Another political figure here. This book is like 10 years old, so none of the politicians they show are in power anymore. The Senate building in Madrid. And, yeah, leader of the Popular Party, Mariano Rajoy. I'm not quite sure. I think J's in Spanish are like a sound. Rajoy. I'm not sure. Supreme Court building as well. And here's the flag of Spain. Let's read about it. It says, Spain's national flag features 3 horizontal bands. The top and bottom bands are red. Between them is a broader yellow band. In the yellow band is the Spanish coat of arms, which shows symbols of the historic kingdoms of Spain. The 2 columns framing the coat of arms represents the Pillars of Hercules, the 2 rocky peaks that guard the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. Oh, I see. They're like, okay, I get it. I thought they were saying that there's rocky peaks on the flag, and I'm like, but that's what the pillars represent. Autonomous communities there, the different historical regions that I mentioned. And standing for the national anthem, the Royal March. Wow, this guy's got a lot of, what, olives? Yeah, a lot of olives. A resources map over here. You can see all the different crops that are grown. And jamon, ham. They eat a lot of ham in Spain. And fish in the south. Lots of fishermen. They use the euro as their currency. Some apples. And lots of cars being produced. It looks like they're being shipped out to be sold. So here's one of the very weird traditions in Spain. This is at a festival in Catalonia where they create these human pyramids, these human columns. Good times. Look at everyone supporting them. Population map, you can see like how no one really lives in the center except for Madrid and mostly around the coastline there. Riding a bicycle, a Chinese immigrant, it says. And this is a Roma woman from the Roma ethnic group selling some flowers. And some men in the Basque country playing some pelota. Like a handball, looks like. Signs written in Castilian, Spanish, and Catalan. That's neat. Let's see. They're working hard in school, university, learning some engineering, it looks like. Oh, that's beautiful. Barcelona Cathedral. Santiago de Compostela, which is a big site for pilgrims. There's a baby here getting baptized. Oh, it's the king's grandson getting baptized. There's the king. Not just any baby, royal baby. Christmas holidays here. And Holy Week, he's collecting the wax off the candles. Very important job. Another one of like the strange kind of like traditions during festivals. Spain has festivals all over it that are extremely, extremely unique, and this is one of them. Semana Santa. The red fortress of the Alhambra, an old mosque. And some Muslims here praying. Oh boy, Diego Velázquez. A really incredible artist. Oh my gosh, I love his paintings. They're so neat. There's Goya, who is quite a person. He was very eccentric, kind of irritated easily. And Pablo Picasso, definitely the most famous, most beloved Spanish painter. Ooh, doing a cool dance here, the flamenco. Mercano, a band from Madrid. Federico Garcia Lorca, famous author. Penelope Cruz and Pedro Almodovar, a really great director. Playing some football here, Real Madrid. Big, big football country. Rafael Nadal, very famous tennis player. And of course there's the traditional sport of bullfighting, which is a little controversial. Another one of the very strange ceremonies, this is the Phallus Festival, where they make these huge statues. You can see this one is Grumpy from Snow White. And then they burn them. Another one of the really weird festivals. Some roses on St. George's Day. Another weird festival, the running of the bulls. And another weird festival, La Tomatina, which looks like a lot of fun. A lot more fun than the running of the bulls, in my opinion. This is Labor Day, so they're having a Labor Day march, parade, whatever you want to call it. A gorgeous countryside, isn't that picturesque? There's some flan. I don't really like tapioca or flan, custard, whatever it is. It's too sweet for me, but I get why people like it. Churros. Now churros I'll eat for sure. And here's gazpacho, a cold soup. Not really into gazpacho either. Some olive oil. I think Spain is like the top producer of olive oil in the world. And this is my favorite Spanish dish, paella. I really love seafood and shrimp and anything that comes out of the ocean in a shell, so I adore paella. It's so good. Out for a little walk there. And there's a wedding. And that's the end of the book. Oh, well, that was fast. So, thank you so much for watching. I'll have another video about Spain for you tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good night.